Chapter 4, Part 2. Mary did not even try to control her rage and humiliation. "You thought I was a native? You dared? You don't know anything about natives. They are not people. They're servants who must salaam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything." She was in such a rage and felt so helpless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt so horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself downward on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. You mustn't cry like that there," she begged. "You mustn't for sure. I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything. Just like you said, I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop crying." There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and sturdy way, which had a good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. "It's time for thee to get up now," she said. "Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry thy breakfast and tea and dinner into the room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on with thy clothes if thou'll get out of bed. If the buttons are at the back, thou cannot button them up thyself." When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from the wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived the night before with Mrs. Medlock. "Those are not mine," she said. "Mine are black." She looked the thick white wool coat and dress over and added with cool approval, "Those are nicer than mine." "Those are the ones I must put on," Martha answered. "Mr. Craven ordered Mrs. Medlock to get 'em in London. He said, 'I won't have a child dressed in black wandering around like a lost soul,' he said. 'It'd make the place sadder than it is. Put color on her.' Mother, she said she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a body needs. She doesn't hold with black herself." "I hate black things," said Mary. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little brothers and sisters, but she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. "Why doesn't thou put on thy own shoes?" she said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. "My ayah did it," answered Mary, staring. It was the custom. She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do a thing their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, "It is not the custom." And one knew that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings, and picking up things she let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots and pick things up and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic, who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters, who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones, who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things. If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would perhaps have laughed at Martha's readiness to talk. But Mary only listened to her coldly and wondered at her freedom of manner. At first she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girl rattled on in her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice what she was saying. You should see 'em all," she said. "There's 12 of us, and my father only gets 16 shilling a week. I can tell you my mother's put to it to get porridge for 'em all. They tumble about on the moor and play there all day, and Mother says the air of the moor fattens 'em. She says she believes they eat the grass same as the wild ponies do. Our Dickon, he's 12 years old, and he's got a young pony he calls his own." "Where did he get it?" asked Mary. "He found it on the moor with its mother when it was a little one, and he began to make friends with it, and give it bits of bread, and pluck young grass for it, and it got to like him, so it follows him about, and it lets him get on its back. Dickon's a kind lad, and animals likes him." Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own, and had always thought she should like one. So she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon, and as she had never before been interested in anyone but herself, it was the dawning of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room which had been made into a nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy old pictures on the walls and heavy old oak chairs. A table in the center was set with a good substantial breakfast, but she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the first plate Martha set before her. "I don't want it," she said. "Thou doesn't want thy porridge?" Martha exclaimed incredulously. "No. Thou doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle on it, or a bit of sugar." "I don't want it," repeated Mary. Said Martha, "I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes." "Why?" said Mary coldly. Okay. End of part 2 of chapter 4.